sorry, the picture quality is terrible. I can't help it. My other phone is broken. Please don't leave. We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Bloodborne! Bloodborne is the new entry in the Dark Souls series. It's not a new IP. Why are people calling it a new IP? It is clearly a new Dark Souls game. The Souls games are third-person action RPGs that are really, really hard. And Bloodborne is a PS4 exclusive. While Bloodborne is definitely at heart a Souls game, there are quite a few differences. Instead of a medieval setting, we are now in a Victorian setting. So Dark Souls was all about stamina management, patience, and timing. So you'd lock onto an enemy, you'd circle around them, and then you'd roll when you had to, or use your shield, and you'd try to get a few swings in before you hid behind your shield again. Just a couple changes that Bloodborne makes completely freshenize, spray Febreze on the Dark Souls formula and make it feel really new. Instead of a shield in your left hand, you now have a gun in your left hand, so instead of a block, it's now a stun. Bloodborne really wants you to play more aggressively. After you take damage in Bloodborne, you can get some of that health back if you swing back at the enemy immediately. That again creates another gameplay decision. Do I try to get my health back or do I back off and heal? Because I only have so many healing items. But if I try to get too greedy, I'll just take more damage. Problem with the gun is I found it pretty unreliable. It's like, are you supposed to shoot them at the beginning of the attack, when the attack would hit you, somewhere in between? Like, sometimes the only time I was able to successfully stun them was when I was taking damage from the attack, and that's not a parry. I didn't block the attack. That makes no sense. I mean, sure, you get the health back if you go and riposte to them, but what if there are other enemies nearby? I think the gunplay could have been cleaned up a little. And obviously some enemies you aren't supposed to use the parry on. Some of you want to just use your melee weapon. And melee weapons are much different in this game. There's a lot less of them. But each weapon kind of has its own place. So Dark Souls, there was hundreds of swords and all kinds of different things. In Bloodborne, you have a few select weapons, but they transform. So you have like a sword that transforms into a longer sword, a sword that transforms into a hammer, an axe that transforms into a longer axe. And you can incorporate that transformation into your combo, into the moveset. So instead of having light quick attacks, you could then throw the block on someone, put your sword into it, and then turn it into a hammer, and then keep swinging at him as long as you got stamina. That was really cool. But at the same time, there's only so many of these weapons, and there's only so many of the, and the guns were all functionally the same. The flame sprayer, the cannon, the blunderbuss, torch. Only 4 weapons you'll ever use in your left hand. So in the end, that just gives you less options, and there's less variety. The 2 things you pick up most often, so Estus is gone, the 2 things you pick up most often are blood vials, which are your healing source, and quicksilver bullets, which is ammo for your gun. The armor, or rather the clothing in this game, because it isn't really armor, doesn't do much to protect you. It's more of a stylistic choice, because the clothing has nearly identical stats, except for some that are like really good against arcane, so a certain boss you'll have to put on a certain set of armor so you can withstand his magic damage a little better. And I thought a few of the clothing sets looked really cool. I like that hunter garb with the little cape thing on it. But I feel I could have done more with that because, again, there's only so many of these outfits, and because they're functionally the same, there's really no reason to just have a million of them then. It's like, okay, it's just a cosmetic change. Well, give me more options. I feel like I could have had some armor plates on there so it looked like something like Assassin's Creed. I feel like that was a really missed opportunity. Other differences from Dark Souls is that instead of a bonfire, now it's a oil lamp. Leveling up is also a lot simpler. Dark Souls, you had a lot of stats to choose what to put your levels in. Bloodborne, there's like 5 or 6. And so for these reasons, I wouldn't really even call Bloodborne an RPG. It's just an action-adventure game, because there really aren't that many options you can take. Something I think they just did really well in this game are the environments. The environments look really good. I mean, graphically, they look nice. The jump to 1080p is definitely noticeable, but again, for a 2015 game, it looks nice. It doesn't look amazing. So the Hunter's Dream is this hub area in the game. It looks really nice. There's little flowers everywhere. You look into this, there's these giant pillar tree things, and it reminds you of Ash Lake from Dark Souls 1. You're like, what are those? So in the Hunter's Dream, there's the doll that levels you up, and then there's these little messenger alien guys that like sit in little bird baths and go blah, and you buy stuff from them. And then up in the house, there's your workshop. So up in the workshop, you can fortify, repair, upgrade your weapons. Then there's Gurman, he's an old man in a wheelchair, talks to you about stuff. And like I said, the Gothic architecture is really, really good. The one concern I had though, I'm like, alright, are we gonna be in like this the whole game? Because it's nice, but and then the moment I thought that, I transitioned to like a foresty area, and then there's a graveyard, and then there's these big churches, and then there's a snowy castle. Some of this stuff is just huge, and you're like, how many bricks are in that thing? Like, someone had to build all that. Like, that's ridiculous. Dark Souls games do give you really big scope with your environments. There's also a pretty good enemy variety. There's angry old men enemies, there's dog enemies, there's these giant tall white guy enemies, there are troll enemies, There are these cute, adorable enemies that do like no damage. There are werewolf enemies. There are enemies with terrible chlamydia. And then there are the single worst enemies in the game. You guys are dicks. The bosses too are great. Dark Souls is all about the bosses. Some news that there are no fog walls initially. You won't know you're in a boss arena until a boss jumps out at you and your exit is blocked. Unless you can kind of tell, like, I'm in this grand opening. Probably a boss battle. There are these giant, furry creature, messy beast things. And there's a pretty good variety of different kinds of bosses. Like, there's these giant things that, you know, you have to circle around, just smacking the heels a million times. And then there are hunter-style bosses, like you, that also have a gun and a sword and they're, like, moving around. What makes these boss battles really good is just the music. Harvest Dream has some nice tunes, but the actual levels are, like, almost silent until you get into a boss battle, and the music swells in. It's very loud and very epic. The atmosphere in these games is really, really good. Something that adds to the atmosphere is the lore. The lore in this game is so good. The world building of Dark Souls is always fantastic. But here's where we get into the story, and this is where I have a bit of an issue with the game. Souls games do not have a lot of cutscenes. When there is a cutscene, you're like, oh my god, there's a cutscene. Because the story is told through talking to NPCs and reading item descriptions. And if you don't like your stories told that way, that's a completely valid criticism. It's like, I don't like that. To be honest, I don't either. But the reason I feel Bloodborne slips up a little here is because in the last two Dark Souls games, there was a basic storyline told to you. And then there's a lot of depth if you look a lot closer to the game. So in Dark Souls 1, it was like, ring the bell of awakening, kill the 4 demon god things, succeed, Gwyn. Dark Souls 2 was find the king, try to get a cure. And Bloodborne is just like, seek the pale blood. I'm like, okay, why? Am I trying to cure this disease that's plagued everyone? In Bloodborne, there's a hunt going on. So he's like, there's beasts. People are turning into beasts, and there's blood, and churches, and the moon, and gods, and all that, and it's very confusing. And I finished the endgame cutscene with no idea of what just happened. And the story itself is good enough, and the atmosphere at the final boss battle is really, really good. You will be presented with a choice near the end of the game. This isn't a spoiler. Hit refuse. I recommend you hit refuse because then you get to fight the final boss. If you hit submit, you get to skip the final boss, and then you haven't beaten the game. Though both ending cutscenes are good in their own right, I suppose. So I was okay with not knowing anything. Oh, like, alright, they better explain this end of the game. And they didn't, and I was really upset. So I had to go. So I understand what happened now, but I shouldn't have to watch lore videos to understand the basic story. I should have to watch lore videos to understand the deeper story. But I should have a base storyline, and I didn't. I read all the item descriptions, and I talked to everybody, and then you watch these videos like, how did they figure that out? How can you be expected to know that? And in Bloodborne, there's one good NPC sort of storyline that made me cry. I'm like, that is really, really touching and really, really sad. So you talk to NPCs through like windows and doors. You don't really see that many. But there were only really 2 NPC windows that I returned to like finish a story. The rest of them were like, they didn't add much to the game. And there are also some changes that happen in the world after you defeat certain bosses. But how can you be expected to find that? How do you know where that is? It's like, I'm expected to go through the entire game again and see if anything's changed every time I defeat a boss. But if you like that kind of subtle storytelling, then this game is right up your alley. If you don't, I wouldn't turn you off from the game completely. I would just say make sure you watch some lore videos on YouTube. VaatiVidya is pretty good about it. Dave Control Live. So there are plenty of people on YouTube who are willing to explain the game to you. I'm not one of them. So co-op and PvP return in Bloodborne. How this works is you ring your beckoning bell if you need help in your world, and if someone else rings a small resonant bell, they can get teleported into your world, provided you have an online connection. And you can fight together or fight a boss or do whatever you have to do. You can also just ring your own sinister bell, and then you can get teleported to someone else who's ringing a sinister bell, and then you can combat in PvP. Now, whenever I rang my small resonant bell near a boss door, I was almost always teleported to someone else's world. But for all the times I rang my beckoning bell waiting for help, I never got help. I always had to fight my own bosses alone. And that makes me hardcore, because I didn't use help. But I'm like, is something wrong with your servers, or is just no one ringing the small resonant bell? I also got completely kicked out of online sessions and returned to the title screen for no reason frequently. I was also never able to engage in PvP, except for in one certain area. So the game's online is pretty unstable. So there's your multiplayer. There's also chalice dungeons, which are like these other side quest things. They're a complete waste of time. I mean, I'd say the only reason they're worth checking out is because there's a couple new bosses in there that you haven't seen in the game. Here comes some more negatives. Very critical. I did like this game a lot. I would recommend this game, but I notice issues. I'm a critic. That's what I do. And all the things it does differently and better and evolves from Dark Souls, there are steps back from Dark Souls. In Dark Souls 2, you could teleport from any bonfire to any other bonfire immediately, whenever you want, wherever you want. In Bloodborne, when you have an oil lamp lit, you need to go back to the Hunter's Dream, and then you need to go up to the headstones and try to figure out which lamp your headstone is at, and then teleport to that lamp. And with a 40-second loading screen, that is ridiculous. That was it was patched recently. But for a whole month that this game was out, this was horrible, horrible bad. And it made farming for souls and going back to places just a pain. You should be able to reset the world just by hitting your oil lamp, and you should be able to teleport to your oil lamp. That was in Dark Souls 2. I don't know why it's not in this game. Look at this load screen. This is ridiculous. This is unedited. This is how long it takes. Now, after the patch, there's item descriptions, and they shaved a few seconds off, but they're still pretty long. Something they did fix from Dark Souls. In Dark Souls, you tended to die when you didn't get hit a lot. Like, a lot. An enemy would swing a sword next to you, and you would die. That does not happen in this game a lot. Something that they did not fix is the terrible camera. The camera is just as bad in this game. Look at this. And whenever you get backed up into the wall, you are forced at looking at, and it clips through things, so you're staring at like a railing as the enemy's killing you, and you can't get out, and you can't see. Why does the lock-on button for the camera also center your vision? So in Dark Souls, when you died, you had a bloodstain, and then you lose all your soul, and all the enemies respawn. So you could go back and get your souls, but you need to touch your bloodstain. So sometimes, instead of just being a bloodstain on the ground, or souls, they're not blood echoes, would be absorbed by a nearby enemy, and you'd have to kill that enemy to get your blood echoes back. Which is a cool idea. Sometimes, when I died, my bloodstain was nowhere near where I died. There's also an elevator of death. In a certain area of the game, there is a place that is only accessible by an elevator, and that elevator glitched. There is a boss down there, and I can't get to it. There's an entire piece of the game that is inaccessible. But it has since been patched. So I tend to be more critical of the Souls. I am a diehard Souls fan, but I think the games get away with a lot of things just because they're Dark Souls, and that isn't fair. For all the issues with Bloodborne, and for all the questionable game design decisions, and all the myriad of glitches, it's still a great game. There's your review for Bloodborne, a month after the game has come out. Bloodborne is a solid reason to own a PS4. I'm Wesley Tomsky. Like, share, subscribe, and comment. Thank you for watching, and happy gaming.